Good morning, guys. It's Miss Michelle. I am coming to you today from my home. Okay. So this morning we are going to look at the story of a lady named Ruth. Okay. So before we start, I want you to think about someone that you can count on. Someone that if you were maybe in trouble or if you didn't quite know what to do, that person you could ask. Okay. Would that be your mom or your dad? Maybe a grandparent, maybe a sibling. As you get older, that relationship with your sibling will change, and that may become your person. Um, a friend. Okay, so maybe you have. Actually, you probably have more than one person that you could rely on in that aspect. So today's story, we're going to be learning about a woman who stayed by her mother-in-law's side even in difficult times. Okay, so we're going to be looking at our in our Bible. We're going to be in Ruth. That is, if you have the same Bible as that I'm using this morning, it is on page 296, and it's the Bible that most of you have gotten whenever you were baptized. So, if not, you can find Ruth in the Old Testament. Okay. So today we're going to start in Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. Okay? So our story begins with a man named Elimelech and his wife Naomi, and their two sons live with God's people in Bethlehem. However, because of a famine, their families moved to a foreign country of Moab. After moving there, Elimelech dies, and Naomi's two sons eventually marry women from Moab. One's name is Orpha and Ruth. Because the women were from Moab, they did not grow up learning about God or worshiping him. Unfortunately, Naomi's two sons also died, so she was left without her husband or her sons. So all she has left were the two ladies that had married her children. Okay, if I look at Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 through 7. Now I am going to read this from the Bible and then talk about it, okay? When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughter-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her two daughters-in-laws, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road and would take them back to the land of Judah. Okay, so when in Bible times, whenever a woman was without her husband or sons to care for him, she was considered to be very poor and unimportant to society. When Naomi learned that the famine was over in her original home country of Judah, she planned to return. And now, if I look through at Ruth chapter 1, verses 8 through 10, we'll find out what happened. Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-laws, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you find rest in a home and another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud, and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." Okay. So at this time, Naomi realizes that she has nothing to offer her daughter-in-laws. She also tells them to go back to their family. But if they go back to their because if they went back to their families, they could marry again because their spouses had passed away. So now we're going to jump to Ruth, still in the first chapter. We're going to look at 14 through 16. At this, they wept aloud. When Orpha kissed her mother-in-law's goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." Okay, so Orpha goes back to her original homeland, but Ruth stays with Naomi. Okay, she wanted to worship her God, and was even willing to end her family to go back to Judah. And I mean, she would be a foreigner to that land. Could you imagine going somewhere and them not believing the same things you do? However, we know through the Bible that this was a great option for her, because she serves the same God as we do. Okay, so if I jump to verse 22, still in the first chapter. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth, the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as a barley harvest has begun. So in this time, this was a very rich crop in which they were trying to harvest all this. And so then at this point would give her some type of job or an entrance into this foreign land. So if I move to Ruth 2, chapter 2, verses 2 through 6. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind everyone whose eyes had and I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered the field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. So he was from the same family tree as her, what would have been her father-in-law. Okay. Because Ruth and Naomi were very poor, Ruth is trying to find grain to help feed them. And this is when she comes up on Boaz, okay? So if I'm looking at verses 11 and 12. So Boaz replied, "I've been told all about you and what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and your homeland to come live with people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Okay, so he's pretty much saying, like, he's recognizing that how devoted she is to Naomi, how she's still taking care of her mother-in-law. And then if I jump to Ruth 4, okay, so give me a second because I got to turn the page, and I'm looking at chapter 14. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel." So eventually Ruth and Boaz, they marry and they have a son. No longer are Ruth and Naomi poor or desolate. Their baby is born, and the woman of the town praises God to provide the woman with a redeemer. Okay, so she eventually remarries. She marries Boaz, and she in turn keeps her mother-in-law there with her, and continues to take care of her and help her. So when we're reading today, there's some important things that I want you to remember, and that is, if I look at 1 Corinthians 1:27, no one is unimportant to God. Okay, you look at Ruth, and she's a foreigner to this land, and sometimes people can be, if you say you start a new school and you don't know anybody and you're somewhat scared, you have to trust that God is going to put the right people with you. And you're not unimportant to God. You're not unimportant to me. I pray for each one of you each day. I guess that's just, it's hard for me to imagine that people think that they're unimportant. Now, I think the devil can get inside you and can make you feel like, oh, I'm not as pretty as so-and-so, or I'm not as smart as that person, or that person has more friends than I do. That doesn't mean anything. In God's eyes, you are important, okay? And if I look at John 3:16, okay, God has a redeemer and a place to